Hey everyone, I'm meteorologist Mark Collins here from the Weather Authority, and we're talking tropics because we have a potential system that may wind up impacting Florida the week before Thanksgiving. In fact, it is a Wednesday here at 11:32, and perhaps on next Wednesday we could see something down here over the tropics developing and then moving through the weekend into the Western Caribbean and eventually getting drawn up northward into Florida next week. So right now the Hurricane Center is calling this Invest number 99. It has a 90% chance of developing. Very unusual to see a tropical entity perhaps even becoming a hurricane, and a major hurricane in November. So it is late in the season, but this has been a crazy season with back-to-back storms impacting Florida with both Helene and Milton, and now we're looking at what could be called Sarah as a developing system right there in the Caribbean. So let's take a look and do an analysis here. I want to point out what is a circulation center. You can actually make out this area here that is developing just north of Honduras. This is not really what we're looking at as the central circulation center that could develop. But usually when you get a swirl in the clouds with thunderstorms developing over it, you can get some type of system developing. But what we are expecting to see is this area back here. This would be our focal point for some type of circulation center developing. So if you're a weather enthusiast and you're on the internet, just don't really focus on that, but what's back here closer to Jamaica, because that is where we're seeing the thunderstorms firing up. And this is a broad area with light winds aloft, and that means shear is low. Low shear is usually favorable for storms to develop, and they can often result in rapidly intensifying storms when it's over warm water. Another way to look at this here, I've taken off the colors. This is just simply the visible satellite. And the visible is the reflection of the cloud tops that the satellite receiver can see. So you can see on the left side that small little swirl, that circulation center. And then on the right side, you see a broader twisting. So there's nothing really developing right now. You have some random thunderstorms, but you see what is like just some broad cyclonic curvature. So you can kind of see how these clouds are going up and around, and you have these thunderstorms here. What we're going to be looking for is this broad circulation tightening and some thunderstorms developing around a circulation center, and it's only then where we could see some organization. And right now I'm not really seeing that. This is going to be a very slow system to develop, and once it gets into the Western Caribbean, what's called the Central American Gyre, or the CAG for short, this is an area that can be really favorable for incubating tropical storms. And in here is where we have extremely warm water temperatures, and it's deep warm water. So the skin temperature of the Atlantic is important. When you get water temperatures over 81 degrees, it's usually a favorable zone for something developing, but it's the depth which is just as important, because this is going to be a system which sits over this area here all week long into the weekend, and that could bring up colder waters. Upwelling is what we call it, and when you have those deep warm water temperatures below, that can result in further intensification. So this is the zone that we're watching here, where we'll probably see something develop over the next 7 days. So I don't see any threats in the Gulf of Mexico until early next week. So talking about the timing of this, we have plenty of time to watch, and much could change. But it does look like some places from the Keys to west central Florida could be impacted by the storm, even Cancun or western portions of Cuba. Cuba has just experienced a Category 3 hurricane, and here you can see that they're not out of the woods with some of these models taking the system back towards the Yucatan. Now the ones that do take it towards Cuba are more of the climatologically driven models. They have a little less skill than the ones that employ math and physics into the forecast. So all the models are pretty much in alignment with the Yucatan seeing some impacts from the system. And here, let's take a look at the dry air aloft, because right now this is in a very favorable area where the amount of moisture in the atmosphere is very favorable for development. But this is the dry air, and these are the cold fronts that have come through and brought in some drier air. If that system were to move into that dry air, it would not develop, but that dry air is staying well to the north, allowing this to develop. Water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico here are in the 70s, so even as it moves northward, the system would likely weaken. But from around dry Tortugas down through the Yucatan Straits, and especially in the western Caribbean, water temperatures are in the mid-80s. In fact, it is near record warmth there, and that is the reason why we're probably going to get something to develop here so late in the season. Water temperatures have not been cooling down at all. So those are the surface water temperatures, and I mentioned the depth of that warm water is very important. And that's what this map shows here, that the potential heat content is sufficient so that even if the storm upwells cooler water, it's really not going to cut it off from developing. So this area here is still a real hot spot in the Caribbean Sea for seeing some type of tropical development. So we'll take a look at some of these areas of concern in November where we often see storms develop, and you can see climatologically it is in the favored spot for storms that usually form along stalled cold fronts. Cold fronts sweep through. We're going to get one here coming through on Friday, and then they wind up dying out across Cuba, and along that frontal boundary you can get cyclogenesis. That's just where you tend to see storms form in those yellow areas, and then they tend to track up and get swept out over the Atlantic. As these cold fronts swing through, they are deflected away from Florida. So very rare to see a hurricane impact Florida in November, but this is the time of year where this year so far has been very abnormal. So let's take a look at two of the more popular models, the GFS and the Euro. So when we're looking at these streamlines, you see the yellow and the blues are very matched with it sweeping back across Florida. So both of the reliable models are getting picked up and moved northward around a strong ridge of high pressure. Then a cold front comes down and swings it back northeastward across Florida. Here's another way to look at the rain as we head towards Thursday. This rain is marking the line of a cold front that comes through, and as that first front misses the system, it will just continue to move off towards the west. So what's going to happen is we'll probably see this bring some heavy rains into Honduras, perhaps even some flash flooding there along those mountain ranges, and then it will be approaching the Yucatan Peninsula. How far west does it go? Well, if it moves more towards this solution, it would likely be drawn northward, and that's not particularly good for us. But notice here through the weekend, we'll be watching it spin away just north of Honduras. So if you've got plans to some of the Bay Isles like Roatan, or it's just going to be really wet down there. It's a favorite tourist hotspot in this area. Also, the Caymans will be dealing with inclement weather, and Jamaica could have some heavy downpours. But eventually, early next week, we'll start to watch for that motion northward, and we'll see how that plays out. If it does get drawn northward, that would definitely put Florida at risk of this system coming into the area. Another model, this is the GFS model. So I just showed you the European, and notice how the GFS is very similar with keeping this system in the Caribbean through the weekend. And then once we head into early next week, it almost looks like we're looking at the exact same model. It just does move more towards the north, a little bit further towards the west, but then here's that cold front coming through, and all those strong winds that come down is going to bring us a kind of a barrier here in North Florida where we wouldn't see any impacts. But Central Florida, notice here, that rain shield starts to come through with some heavy flooding expected into Central Florida, and this would be a week from today, next week. So we're looking at around November 21st, where we could see some of those heavy rains and the potential for a hurricane moving into west central Florida. So that is a timeline on this developing system that would be called Tropical Storm Sarah without an H. So and also into next weekend, we could be dealing with some nice cool air on the backside of that storm. So this weekend, actually, lows get down into the 50s. And then as we head into next week, notice no rain is in the forecast when that system could be approaching west central Florida, because right now I see no indications that this would be drawn northward into our area. So that's a quick look at what's happening down in the tropics, and we'll be keeping you posted on that system as it evolves here through the weekend. I'm meteorologist Mark Collins for News4JAX.